Good evening, everybody. My name is Brenton McGee, and I'm the Performing Arts Associate here at Friends Home in Kennett. And it's my pleasure and distinct honor to bring these music lectures again, Meet the Musician lecture series for our residents and for people who want to get to know what Friends Home is about and the diverse programs that we bring. Our special guest is a friend of mine from Wilmington, Delaware, and his name is Arreon Harley Emerson, and I will read his bio. He is a native of Baltimore, Maryland. Arreon A. Harley Emerson was appointed Director of Music and Operations of the Choir School of Delaware in June 2013. In this position, he is responsible for musical components of the renowned choir school program, as well as the day-to-day operations of the organization. Mr. Harley Emerson began singing with Doreen Falvey and the Peabody Conservatory Children's Chorus at the age of 7. Later, he went on to sing with the Columbia Pro Cantori under the directorship of Mrs. Frances Dawson. Harley Emerson began building his technique through private voice and piano lessons in the studio in Columbia, Maryland. He would later return to the Peabody Children's Chorus during his college years, serving diligently as a conducting intern for 3 years. Mr. Harley Emerson has had the opportunity to sing with the Columbia Festival Orchestra, the Baltimore Symphony Orchestra, the Delaware Symphony Orchestra, and the Baltimore Opera Company. Mr. Harley Emerson graduated from Goucher College in Baltimore, Maryland, with bachelor degrees in music theory and composition and vocal performance opera. There, he studied piano and voice and conducting. He received his Master of Music degrees in choral conducting and vocal performance from the University of Delaware School of Music, studying choral conducting with Dr. Paul Head and voice with Dr. Noel, I'm not going to even pronounce her last name,
Archambault.
Archambault. Okay, great. Mr. Harley Emerson is a doctoral candidate at the University Fellow at the Boyer School of Music and Dance at Temple University in Philadelphia. He's had the opportunity to conduct in venues such as St. Peter's Basilica in the Vatican City, the Kimmel Center for the Arts in Philadelphia, and the Joseph Meyerhoff Symphony Hall in Baltimore. Mr. Harley Emerson also contributed a chapter to the Oxford Handbook for Choral Pedagogy entitled The Gang Mentality of Choirs, How Choirs Have the Capacity to Change Lives. He also has had a TED Talk that bears the same title. Committed to principles of diversity, equality, inclusion, and belonging, Mr. Harley Emerson has established a thriving consultancy to assist arts and culture nonprofit organizations in remaining relevant in the 21st century. His works include studies, strategic planning, boards of excellence, etc. So many different things in that. Mr. Harley Emerson currently serves as the national chair of the American Choral Directors Association Diversity Initiatives Committee, an active member of Wilmington, Delaware's community. Mr. Harley Emerson is on the Delaware Arts Alliance Board of Directors, where he serves as president of the board and chairs the Advancement Committee, which is tasked with fundraising, membership development, and DEIB. In addition to conducting and performing classical opera works, Mr. Harley Emerson is an avid lover of musical theater. When not performing, you can find him indulging in his true passion, potatoes. We'll get some resonance and we'll love that. I can tell you that. And he's never met a potato that he did not eat. And he has a website called equalitysings.com, EQUITYSINGS.com. And I took just a little snippet from his website. On a personal note, I met Arreon Harley Emerson when I was auditioning to be a choral scholar last year. I felt it was the right time to be a choral scholar, and he graciously allowed me to be a scholar for the last year, 2021, 2022, and it's been a joy and a pleasure to sing under his direction. I always like to think of Arreon as someone who puts on a very diverse program that is striving for the 21st century, but also a program that's unique, that's different, and that is vibrant in the Wilmington scene. So he's a great friend, very talented musician, and is a countertenor as well, and has a wonderful husband. And it's been a joy to work with Arreon and to bring him to present his music lecture for you all today. So, ladies and gentlemen, without further ado, here is Mr. Arreon Harley Emerson.
Well, thank you.
Well,
thank you. Thank you so much. It is a pleasure to be here with you, Brenton, and my greetings to everyone who is watching this. Just thrilled to be able to talk about some of my favorite things. It's definitely humbling to hear all of those wonderful things read about me. And I always like to tell people that I have just the most incredible colleagues and teams and singers like Brenton who make all of this possible. It certainly is not any stroke of brilliance on my end to make all of these wonderful things happen. So I always like to acknowledge all of the people that are a part of, this ecosystem. So just a bit about me. You heard a bit about my educational background and where I grew up. I was fortunate enough to be able to grow up with two very different and contrasting musical traditions. So I grew up first in the Black church tradition, which was awesome and wonderful. I literally went to church within weeks of me being born and began being exposed to the music of the church then. And I just have that in my ear, in my heart, in my spirit, in my blood. And it is very much so a part of who I am. And for a very long time, I didn't really think about that as a formal type of music training. And I never really thought of it as an asset. I kind of had it compartmentalized as just like, oh yeah, I like to go to church, I like this music, blah, 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 blah. But I never really thought of it as an asset. I never thought of it as something that I could be sharing. And much of that is due to really a restrictive way of how we think of music. So when we think about a conservatory or when we think about a school of music, we don't question what kind of music. We automatically assume Western classical music. And Western classical music is wonderful and Western classical music is great, but that is less than 20% of the music making tradition of the world. So I always try to acknowledge that my first kind of upbringing and training was in the church with gospel and spirituals and hymns. So that really great liturgical tradition is where I first began training. And I was really fortunate to also have at the same time, those formative years, starting at age 7, this experience with the Peabody Conservatory. And they had this dynamic program, a children's choir, other courses as well to take there. And it was a game changer. It opened my mind. I remember the very first rehearsal, I walked in and they were singing, the choir, the ensemble, the older advanced ensemble was singing Hans Leo Hassler's Cantate Domino, which is just this great, vibrant, celebratory, declamatory piece. And I had never heard polyphony quite like that. So it kind of starts off with everyone singing together in harmony, Cantate Domino Canticum Novum. And then it goes into these little polyphonic sections. And then each of the parts has different things going on. And that was really different. That's not necessarily the hymn style or the gospel style, which is more everyone is singing the same rhythms at the same time with some different harmony and maybe some different parts coming in. But it was a type of music that I had never experienced before. And I felt like the heavens had opened up and I had really experienced something that I had really never heard of before. It sounded like only something that I would hear in a movie or in a commercial. And here I was experiencing it and feeling it in real time. And I think that my life's mission has been to continue to create experiences that were like that, where people are hearing some music for the first time and are feeling like the heavens are opening, feeling that opportunity is opening, feeling themselves called and compelled. And that's really what my life's work heretofore has been about. And for some communities, that means introducing them to gospel music and spirituals and the scholarship that's behind them. And for others, it has been that traditional Western classical canon. I feel really fortunate and lucky that in my position here at the choir school and in my position at the American Choral Directors Association and a lot of the consulting work that I do, that I'm really living both worlds. I'm fortunate enough to conduct Palestrina and Bach and Mozart and Beethoven and all those folks, and also to be able to do gospel and spirituals and other genres, or what we would say idioms, within the African American diaspora. So I feel very fortunate, and I try to make sure that my scholarship is really worthy of these great legacies of music. So here at the choir school, we do a lot of both. So the training is very much so rooted in the Anglican choral tradition. How is it rooted in the Anglican choral tradition? Well, we train our choristers in a very particular way using a particular method. It's a variation of what is known as the RCM model or the Voice for Life model. Back 1,000 years ago, people began to sing in cathedrals, right? And then these British cathedrals, these Anglican cathedrals, with these choirs of men and boys. It actually started even before in England, in the Sistine Chapel, and in Italy, where these single gender men and boy choirs would be singing this fantastic and rich repertoire. That moved across the continent and moved west to England, and there became the formalized cathedral choir. And the cathedral choir had a choir school that trained boys and trained them to sing professionally, because those boys were the sopranos, because at that time, women were not singing in liturgical services. And so those boys were singing real music all the time. They were not singing children's choir music. They were not doing, music that was what we would think of as graded or progressively getting more difficult. It was, this is the music that we need for this Sunday, and this is the liturgical need that we have. It's Trinity Sunday, and we need a song for Trinity Sunday. We need a song for Easter. We need a song for Lent 4, whatever it is. And so they were singing for that. And so those boys had a rigorous training, and we too have a rigorous training model. It is rooted in a fairly classical, traditional, I would say, paradigm. A lot of sight singing, a lot of bel canto vocal technique, a lot of those sort of approaches. And that's been a big legacy of the choir school. And the other part of that is the intergenerational model, which means that there are children and adults singing together. That used to be normal in churches. That was the norm, again, because women were not singing in choirs, and so boys were. But you don't see that as frequently now, and certainly not in the United States of America. You see it more frequently in England, and then you have some pockets of intergenerational programs at churches in the United States and in other places where there are churches in the Anglican communion, so churches that are coming from the Church of England. What's unique here about our program at the choir school is that we've maintained that intergenerational piece of it. The kids are singing advanced repertoire. They're singing it with the adults. They're having that training. And that is the main medium of the choir, is the students singing with the adults. Of course, it's open to anyone now of any age. We've got students who have never sung before. We've got community adults that have never sung before. We've got professional singers like Brenton who are in the choir. So everyone is singing together. And that's how the choir began in 1883. 1883. It's a long time ago. The choir has been singing continuously since 1883. That is 140 years. We're celebrating this year the 140th anniversary of the choir and the 25th anniversary of our after-school program. But what is important to know is that the cathedral, it was actually established in the 1850s, established their choir in 1883 with their first director, who they brought over from England. The choir has been singing consistently since then, but the demographics of the choir have begun to mirror the demographics of our Wilmington community. So where that was at one time, this was the area where many of the DuPont Company managers worked. DuPont Company is one of the largest companies, global companies in the world. They specialized in making gunpowder, and that then evolved to them making synthetic materials, nylon, Teflon, all those sorts of things like that. And so there was a lot of wealth in this area. The DuPonts founded the cathedral where we were founded. They founded it on the site of a tavern, and they got rid of the tavern because they didn't want their workers drinking and not coming to work their very best selves. And so they did what every single billionaire does. They knocked down the tavern and built a church. And that's what they did. And that was really the beginning of the choir school. And they got boys and men, and they had this kind of choir school intergenerational model that they had. Fast forward to the 90s. The demographics of Wilmington are changing. Wilmington becomes a majority Black and brown African-American city. And at that point, the choir school began to do a lot of outreach into the community. Today, the majority of our students are African-American, students of color, though there are students of a variety of races and religious beliefs that sing within the choir. So it's really open to anyone. And we feel a responsibility to make sure that because we are serving students of different racial and ethnic backgrounds, that is reflected and represented in their musical education. And so we, in addition to doing classical works, also like to be able to do gospel and spirituals. We do things that are in the jazz idiom. We do things from continental Africa. So there is a lot that we do, and that's why we do it, because we want there to be cultural relevance to what we are doing with our students and to see themselves reflected in the music, which is really important. And we want them to be able to see African-American composers and composers of color who are, yes, doing gospel and spirituals, but we also want them to see African-American composers who are writing in Western traditions as well. Those would be folks like Samuel Coleridge Taylor, folks like Marcus Garrett, Zenaida Robles, folks like Ulysses Kay. These folks were Black, or are Black, some of them are still living, but they were writing in more traditional classical expressions. And so here at the choir school, we find it important to have all of that under one roof. We like to think of it as a well-balanced diet. Now, we don't just talk about gospel. We don't just talk about doing spirituals, and we don't just perform gospel, and we just don't perform spirituals, but we take a lot of time to talk about the stories behind it, to talk about the scholarship and the craftspersonship behind all of this music. So a lot of times when people, and I say people, when we see the performance of gospel and spirituals, they generally are kind of like, oh, at the end of a concert program, right? They're kind of like the lighter fare or the palate cleanser at the end of a program. And so we have tried to elevate that to say these aren't just fun songs that are at the end of a program, but the spirituals come with this rich history that come from this really dark time in our country's history, referring to enslavement here, but have so much pride but have so much joy, so much creativity. These songs had many coded messages and hidden messages of how to navigate the Underground Railroad. They spoke about inspiration. They helped people to learn. There's just so many great things about the spiritual. I could go on for days about the importance of the spiritual. And then that grew into gospel music. And gospel music has been a huge contribution. And what we have to understand is that both spirituals and gospel are America's original music. And that is something that is unique to the United States of America. Western classical music is not. That was brought over with folks to the United States of America. And what was born here is spirituals and gospel and jazz, right? And those idioms changed the world. They changed pop music and R&B, and from there came hip hop, and just so many offshoots came from that. And that's not to say that Americans don't continue to contribute in the Western classical style, but that was not born here on this land. It was born in Western Europe, and then it traveled throughout the rest of the world, and gospel and spirituals and jazz were born here in the United States and then spread across the world. So that's what my area of research, where it really is in the music of African-American composers, and not just gospel and spirituals, but also the classical works. We refer to the works such as gospel, spirituals, hip hop, jazz, all of those traditional genres. We call those idioms or idiomatic music. And then we call the other pieces that are from the Western canon and the classical tradition non-idiomatic pieces. So we've got idiomatic pieces, gospel, jazz, hip hop, blues, and non-idiomatic pieces, traditional classical. That can be instrumental, that can be vocal, etc. But it is your traditional classical idiom. And so here at the choir school, we put an emphasis on both. So what I'm going to show you guys is first some examples of the choir school singing. And I'm going to show you us first doing some Bach. I think that Bach is important, except for this past season and during the time where we weren't actually singing together, but we were doing virtual choir videos. We traditionally do one Bach cantata a year. This year was a little bit different because we exclusively did works by composers of color, women, and other composers from underrepresented identities. But I do want to show you a little bit of of the intergenerational choir. And the reason why I'm going to show you Bach is because Bach is the pinnacle of intergenerational choral writing. So we always like to think, wow, Bach, complicated, hard. It is. It's sophisticated. It's classy. It's all of those wonderful things. But I always like to remind people that Bach had an intergenerational choir and he used boy sopranos, right? And so that's really important for us to remember that he had an intergenerational choir. Yes, women did sing some of the solos back in Bach's day, but each Sunday, he did work with the boys and professional men who sang in a choir in Leipzig. And I'm going to play an example of the opening of probably one of the most famous Bach cantatas. This is cantata number 4, BWV number 4, Christ lag in Todesbanden, which is technically the most performed Bach cantata on the planet. Outside of Jesu meine Freude, which is Jesu joy of man's desiring, comes from that. And most people know just that little piece of that. But as far as cantatas that are actually performed in their entirety, BWV number 4 is the most popular. BWV number 4 is a cantata that is written for an intergenerational choir, as I mentioned, and it's also written for Easter. So in this cantata that you're going to see the choir school singing. This is before Brenton joined us. It's a couple of years old, but we sang it for the Wilmington Bach Festival that we created And we pair the music in this Wilmington Bach Festival of Bach with Richard Smallwood, who we're going to talk about a little bit later today. And the reason why I pair those two together is because we understand Bach as being a consummate musician, a devout Lutheran who was compelled and called to write music for the church, as is Richard Smallwood to the gospel idiom. And so that's why I like to pair these two together. And I'm going to bookend today with the Bach and with Total Praise by Richard Smallwood. So I'm going to just play this example.
And I'm going to make you the host so you can do that.
Awesome.
Because I think, yeah, we'll make you the host now. Yes. Great. You are the host now.
Fantastic. Oh, let me reshare my screen and make sure I share my sound with that. That's the secret. Just make sure I share my sound with this. So this is the Choir School of Delaware performing the opening chorus of Chris Lagen Todesbanden. What I do want to point out to you is that you're going to hear one period instruments. And so period instruments are replicas of violins, harpsichords, other wind instruments from Bach's time. It's important that we use period instruments because it helps us to better perceive the colors that Bach would have heard during his time. So everything is down a half step as well. And instead of using concert tuning, we're using Baroque tuning, which is a little bit lower. Instead of A440, we're using A415. Also, you're going to be able to clearly hear the kids singing. The trebles is what we call them, treble voices. That's the soprano part. They sing the cantus firmus, or the melody, or a chorale melody. And then the altos, tenors, and basses sing a virtuosic part under that. But you're going to hear the kids singing, Chris Lagen Todes, right? And you hear long notes, but you can hear a different quality of their voices than the adult voices. So it's a really great example of intergenerational choral writing and singing here. Here we go. And I love that piece for so many reasons. It's such an exciting piece. It's got these different parts, great instrumental introduction, but I love the contrast between the soprano part and the rest of the voice parts that are there. And you can hear it really clearly, and it helps to really help to understand the intergenerational singing and just how it all comes together. I think it's a really great example, very clear to hear those different colors, and why intergenerational singing I think is really important, and how it can expand our choral palette to be able to have these adult and children's voices together. Next, what I want to play for you is a piece that I discovered a couple of years ago, probably 4 years ago at this point, by Dr. Zenaida Robles. Dr. Zenaida Robles is a composer out located in California. She has a church choir out there. She's got a community group, and also works in school, and is just a wonderful composer. She's an African-American woman, just taking the world by storm. Excellent sense of writing. This piece was not necessarily written for intergenerational choir, but of all of the pieces that we sang this year, this might be one of my favorites. And I feel like that this recording is excellent. And it again allows you to be able to hear the different quality of colors that is expanded when you have intergenerational singing. This piece, Veni Sancte Spiritus, which is Latin and comes from Come Holy Spirit. It's talking about come Holy Spirit, come. It's commonly done on Pentecost, about the coming of the Holy Spirit. And this is such a fresh take. It's a non-idiomatic piece, so it's not gospel, it's not spiritual, but it lives somewhere in between. There are kind of some pop kind of feelings to it, very contemporary. And this kind of takes us, it keeps us in the comfortable Western feel, but begins to pivot us. And I think it's just an excellent example of what we do. I don't know that I'll play all of this for you, but I'll play certainly the opening of it. The choir did such an excellent job singing this. And it's a piece that I really want to do again with the choir. I can't even imagine what this piece is going to be like when we're able to sing unmasked, because we've been still singing masked, as you'll see in this performance, as we've got kids and folks of all different ages. And so just to make sure everyone's safe, we've been masking for the year. Here we go. This is Dr. Zenaida Robles's setting of the Latin Veni Sancte Spiritus.
Spiritus,
I just love it. Oh, hold on, let me stop that. But I love that recording because it's so great. It's so different. You would never, I mean, if you were to hear that, it's so great. It just sings well. You can hear the aspects of the intergenerational choir, and that is really awesome, and that is really cool. Now, you can see we're shifting from Bach to something more contemporary that's a little bit different. You can definitely hear a little bit influences from some kind of pop idioms, R&B, jazz, particularly on that last chord, right? And that then we're going to start getting to more idiomatic music. So more music that is born from the Black diaspora. And now we're going to talk about spirituals. So spirituals were songs that were originally created, and I say created, not composed. We never say that spirituals were composed, because they weren't. They were created, and later they were arranged, but they were not composed because they were communal creations from folks. And so these songs, these art songs, folk songs, are not composed, right? They are created. All folk songs across the world are created, not composed, and then they're later arranged. But these were created out of these crazy circumstances. But what we think of as spirituals today are not exactly what would have necessarily been sung in fields and things like that. What we sing today as the concert spiritual is taken from the tradition of the Fisk Jubilee Singers. So Fisk was an all-Black school, college, and they had come upon hard financial times, and the Fisk Jubilee Singers, this choir, decided they were going to start coming up with these arrangements of spirituals and having these concerts to raise money for their school. Fisk still exists today, so obviously they were very successful. Fisk, they are known as spreading the spiritual across the globe. They sang for the Queen of England. They sang for the President of the United States. They toured throughout Europe, and they spread the spiritual far beyond just the United States. And they began to take what was just a folk song and a field song and a field idiom to a concert idiom. So when we think about spirituals, a lot of people are like, oh, I want to be authentic in it. And I'm like, no, you don't actually want to be authentic as in the field version of the spiritual. You want to be authentic as in the original performance as offered by the Fisk Jubilee Singers, which is an important distinction to make, because there are some quite different approaches to the spirituals and diction and how it would have been taught. And for instance, the harmonies would not be nearly as elaborate as they are in these concert arrangements and these sorts of things like that. So I'm going to show you just this little snippet video. It's very short about the Fisk Jubilee Singers so that you can understand a little bit about who they are and their history. Because I always like to say the spiritual would not have survived if not for the Fisk Jubilee Singers. So let's learn a little bit about the Fisk Jubilee Singers.
The Fisk Jubilee Singers were the lyrical voice of Black Reconstruction. They introduced the world to the sacred artistry of their enslaved ancestors, the songs known as the spirituals. Their home base was Fisk University, launched in 1866 as a school for African Americans in Nashville, Tennessee. By 1871, Fisk was facing a serious financial crisis, placing its future in doubt. The school's music teacher and university treasurer organized a student choir, then led them on tour, hoping to raise enough money to save Fisk. It was a bold gambit.
The repertoire of the Fisk Jubilee Singers struck a chord with the audiences.
Most white concert patrons had only seen Black people on stage in minstrel shows. The spirituals were the country's first real introduction to African American music and Black religious traditions.
Oh, brothers, you ought to have been there. Yes, my Lord.
These are songs of overcoming. They were about healing. They were about love. They were about the Black struggle. they allowed someone else to understand what it means to be in your world or in your shoes.
The Fisk Jubilee Singers brought a sense of dignity, purpose, and beauty, shared that tradition, and served as a reminder of the deep humanity of Black people.
With the profits generated by the group's performances, Fisk was able to buy the land on which it sits today. Fisk is one of the many historically Black colleges and universities established during Reconstruction that still thrive. The Fisk Jubilee Singers have received the National Medal of the Arts and have been inducted into the Gospel Music Hall of Fame.
Let my people go.
To this day, the school continues to celebrate the departure of the choir's first tour.
Fabulous, right? Absolutely fabulous. And so important that we know the Fisk Jubilee Singers because they completely revolutionized how the concert spiritual was performed. And so I take that to heart and try to, in my own work, put that forward, is that Fisk Jubilee model of highly virtuosic gospel and spirituals, but particularly with the spirituals that are there. I'm going to show a little clip of Wade in the Water of them singing, and then I'm going to close out with a piece of gospel that the choir school is singing. If you want to see the choir school sing some spirituals, we do a lot of spirituals. I'm not going to play one for you today just because there's not enough time, but I would love for you to continue to look us up, and you can just go to YouTube and look up Choir School of Delaware, and I can guarantee you that you're going to find a spiritual. You can't look up Choir School of Delaware on YouTube and not find a handful of spirituals that are going to just make your day. So this is a little bit of Wade in the Water. Wade in the Water is a coded song, meaning, yes, it's you have this text, but there's a meaning behind it. Wade in the Water was used on the Underground Railroad. Harriet Tubman used this piece to help those who were freedom seekers on their journey north. And what was happening was they were being chased by dogs and by slave catchers, and to not get caught and not to have their scent caught by the bloodhounds, they would jump in the water so that the scent would stop and that they would kind of wade in the water, head up, head down, stay in there until folks had passed and the passage was once again clear. This is the Fisk Jubilee Singers now performing Wade in the Water. And this is just, I cannot even tell you, just the sound quality, the richness of it, how they present this. There is nothing less than artful scholarship that you will see in this recording. And so I felt compelled to share it with you today. This is Fisk Jubilee Singers singing Wade in the Water.
trouble the water. It chilled my body, but not my soul. God's not gonna trouble the water. I go to wade in the water. Wade in the water, children. Wade in the water. God's not gonna trouble the water. If you don't believe I believe, God's not gonna trouble the water. Well, just follow me down to Jordan Street. God's not gonna trouble the water. You wade in the water. Wade in the water, children, wade in the water. God's not gonna trouble the water. Wade in the water. Wade in the water, children, wade in the water. God's not gonna trouble the water. Wade in the water. Wade in the water, children, wade in the water. God's not gonna trouble the water. God's not gonna trouble the water. God's not gonna trouble the water.
I just love the spirituals because they have a metaphoric way and illustrative way of talking. The verse that you just heard, I stepped in the water and the water was cold. It chilled my body, but not my soul. I just love just what's being illustrated there. And so that's why I just love the spirituals, because I feel like these are sayings that we can keep with us today and continue to give us inspiration, whoever we are, no matter what we look like, no matter what our experience is, that we can all relate to struggle. And what I want to leave you guys with today is the choir schools, what I would say is our swan song. So you heard in the beginning, Richard Bach, and I mentioned how we sing total praise. We sing total praise at the end of the majority of our concerts, not all, but the vast majority of our concerts, we sing this. And total praise is, I like to say, it's a musical home for so many folks from African-American and Black churches. This is a piece that is sung commonly throughout the United States of America. If you go to a Black church, everyone knows the words, they want to sing, they want to pretend. It's just such a important piece of music. And the choir sings it, and they do such a great job. This performance is from our Black History Month concert. I will play all of this. Well, maybe I'll skip around in it because it's a little bit long of a recording, but it is really fantastic. This is Total Praise. just a great number. And it's a piece that's special to us and it's meaningful and we love doing it. So yeah, so thank you for allowing me to share a little bit about the choir school and what it is that we do and the kind of music that we do and why we do it, because I think it's a little bit different. And I think that's great. I think there should be choirs that are doing all different kinds of things out there. And this is just one way and one approach that you can do it. There's no right way or wrong way. There's only, earnest and responsible and scholastic and artistic ways, I think, to approach it. But those are vast and varied in what they can take, what they might look like and what form they might take. So I'm thrilled to be able to share some of that. And please do look at the choir school, come check out a concert, and you'll be able to hear all of this live.
Thank you, Arreon. I know the residents will be clapping. And residents, when you're listening to this recording, first of all, we will have him back at some point when you can meet him live on Zoom. And second of all, if you have questions for me, for the residents on this recorded videos, just send them my way and I'll make sure Arreon gets those questions. I'm recording from my house for some circumstances, but thank you, Arreon. And yes, check out Choir School of Delaware. It's a really wonderful group. I'm a little part of that choir and I'm grateful for my part. But really I totally love the group and it's a really great group to see and watch. So I have a couple questions. Mom, do you want to start with your questions and stuff before I get away here?
I think it's wonderful how your roots came from church music. And, it's amazing how many of the singers that's true of. I know I'm reading a book now where John Lennon and Bob Dylan and Alice Cooper and Johnny, there's so many famous musicians began that way. And I just think that's giving that experience to those children like you experienced at the Peabody. And my grandfather was a soloist in the St. Paul Episcopal Church down in Baltimore, and they were on the radio and he was a boy soprano. And
in fact, we're both from Baltimore, Maryland originally.
Yes,
so I was born in Maryland and my mom, so
how do you work with different children of so many varying levels?
Yeah, well, that's the challenge. So, we split them up. So we basically split them up based on kind of where they are. So we put them in 3 different groupings. And then we also rehearse with the adults as well. But I rehearse the students independently of the adults so that I can really differentiate for them and give them the skills that they need, whether that's musical skills. Sometimes it's how do I approach singing this? Sometimes it's literacy, sometimes it's like vocal pedagogy, but in any regard, we do break it down. We do break it down by age or experience level vocal development so that we're able to make our instruction really meaningful for those choristers. And then once a week, they rehearse with the adults, but otherwise they're rehearsing separately so that they can get really what they need.
How do you keep them inspired? How do you inspire them to have that love of music as a child? Brenton had it as a child. It sounds like you did. And it sounds like you've really got the opportunity to foster that real passion at a young age.
Yeah. One of the things, I think that we have to think that music isn't so fragile that we'll break it, right? I think that's the first thing for kids is that like, no one wants to be like, oh, I did it wrong. And then there's so many people who have like these traumatic experiences when they're first learning music and then it turns them off and they might not move forward. doesn't mean you lower the expectation. You do have to get it right, because even if you sing 90% of the notes right, that would sound terrible, right? If we sang 90% of all of the accurate notes, we would be like, that is the worst choir in the world. So music does take precision, and it does need to be accurate. However, there is a way in which you can encourage it. Mine is like, come on, we can do this. We can do better. The music demands that we do better. And the other thing is, I only choose music of merit. Does not matter what kind of music, what genre, but we only do quality music. We don't do any music out there that's just kind of what I like to call the puppy mill compositions that they are just pumping out for developing choirs or for children or community choirs that are just accessible to be accessible, but aren't really exhibiting excellent craft personship. And it needs to be a well-crafted piece. So I always like to say, you cannot make a poor composition sound good. You can only improve a composition, right? It is not that I feel like bad music selection happens all the time. There are pieces of music that are not the same quality, and it does not matter who sings that piece. It's never going to be as good as it could have been. So I think quality is really important. Quality music that you're choosing for a purpose. I try to have thematic themes to the concert. Our kids are very much so interested in songs from their own culture. So I think by doing things like total praise and spirituals, that might be something that they might be more familiar with through their own lived experiences. Then when we do something like Zenaida Robles or Garcia Nunez, who is this Black and Portuguese composer, that it's going to be more familiar. Like they're going to be willing to go on this journey with you. They're going to be inspired to go on this journey because they were able to have this kind of scaffolded approach to something unfamiliar. So I always like to start with something familiar and then go into things that are a little bit more obscure. And that's how all of the choir school programs are. I tend to always start with things that might be familiar to the audience or idioms that are familiar, whether it's gospel, spirituals, or other sort of things like that. And then as we get to the middle, we get to the more obscure pieces and the more kind of like things that might be unfamiliar to the singers and the audience, but they've warmed up to it. There's been trust that has been deposited in the trust bank. So I think that's important. So we have to remember first that we teach people. We don't teach music, we teach people. Anyone who tells you that they teach music is doing the wrong thing, and they probably are going to have students that they are not retaining and they are uninspired. We teach people. We happen to work within this music field, but first and foremost, we teach people. And that's, I think, important.
That's a wonderful approach.
Yes.
I think, has that been the approach of choir school all along? It sounds like it was.
I think that it's been part of what we do, but I think it's evolved certainly over the years to be more of like a philosophy and just, it's part of our fingerprint. I think that people know us for doing, kind of taking this approach.
Your reputation.
Yes.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
So good. Yeah, a couple questions here. What got you into music? Like why music? Why didn't you do lawyer? Or why didn't you do, those kinds of things? Why music?
I think church, that's what it is. Like, I was in church, started singing, everybody sings. I wanted to sing because everybody else was singing. And I was like, oh man, like I like what this is. I like this. And I mean, singing, particularly in my church, was really big. Unlike a lot of liturgical services, I went to a non-denominational church, which had like a 30-minute plus praise and worship section. So that's more music than you might get in some services when you're singing, 1 minute here, 2 minutes there, 3 minutes there, maybe a 4-minute anthem. 4-minute anthem, and that's the big piece of the day. No, we always had a chunk of the service that was music. And then there's music, even instrumental under the sermons as the pastor's getting really excited and things like that. So I think I just saw what it could do to, and that's what really funneled my love for music. And I think just exposure really young to different types of music, and certainly classical choral music and classical instrumental music was important. I think early exposure is really key.
How about your family? You come from a musical family?
My brother does music. My mom, no, not at all. Couldn't carry a tune in a bucket. But both my brother and I were both musical. So I think definitely maybe some genes, but
Okay.
Good. So choir school. So it started earlier than I thought it would, 1883, if I'm right on that. So like Anglican style, why did they choose Wilmington? What was special about Wilmington? Like, if you do know, why was it Anglican? Why wouldn't it just been Presbyterian or Methodist?
Sure.
Why Anglican? Why Wilmington? Those kinds of things.
It's a complex reason, but I'll give you the Reader's Digest version. Some of it is like peer pressure because everybody else around here was Anglican. First state in the Union, one of the oldest dioceses in the United States of America, and there were a lot of Anglican churches. Next, because they came to Delaware and they went right on the other side of these walls, like 2 blocks, is the Brandywine River, and the Brandywine River is what powered the mills, right? They were using the water to turn the mills, and that's how they were making the gunpowder and all of that. So they came for the mills to make the gunpowder, and it happened that there was a large Anglican presence here that was already established. The DuPonts were French, and but they also wanted to be part of high society, and part of that was being a part of the Anglican Church.
There might be this intergenerational thing. I know that there's a lot of singing and the adults encourage the students, but someone who, a resident or someone that might be listening to that wants their child or grandson into something like a choir school, what else do you do besides it? Because I know you do more things.
Mm-hmm.
Could you talk a little bit about that after school program, someone that might consider coming to a choir school and bringing their grandson or son there?
So we've got a lot that's happening. We've got a lot of, we take a holistic approach to our students, our choristers, what we call them. So they receive homework help. They have a meal with us every single day, a hot meal with us every single day. They have access to tutors, one-on-one mentors. We do a lot of life skills. We call it identity formation as well. So that's like, how are we building excellent citizens? That's a big part of what we do. And how do we be in community with one another? Particularly in these polarized times, I think it's important that we transfer the lessons of choir, which are being an individual in the context of a community. That's all choir is, right? Being an individual in the context of a community. How do we transfer that over to citizenship and life skills? And so that's a big part of what we do. We have camps, after school programming, a lot of help with getting into colleges, helping people explore what a future career might be for them, helping with advising where they might go to school for high school, because there is a complex school choice system here in Wilmington, Delaware.
Great. So we both graduated from very, schools that teach that Western classical canon, the Bachs, the Mozarts and stuff. Like, my view is they, like the spirituals and the gospel, they don't teach that enough in colleges. So like, going into the 21st century, why don't American schools teach more of that styles, most of them, and why, and what you hope that spirituals and gospel songs would bring to a college education for a vocal performance that might not know a darn thing about spiritual singing and stuff like that. So what's your approach to that? Why is it still dominant Western canon and not even just colleges, but choirs in general sing the Western canon? But what's your thoughts on that?
So this is just rooted in bias, right? And so in racial bias that we've had, and we have to remember that these schools of music came as European structures. They existed long before the United States of America. And so they began in a lane and down a lane that did not include people that looked different, that did not include different musical traditions. I think just now we're understanding that we need to be more intentional about diversity, and that there are many benefits from diversity for us all. And so I think that's why I do see a change beginning to happen. I think this change will be slow. I think this change will be progressive. But I do think that we're going to see more gospel and spirituals that are taught scholastically and in the academy, is what we would say, being taught in the academy. Yes, this was not taught in the curricula that we had. I never had a class on gospel. Gospel music was not included in choral lit. It was not included even in world music. So I think that's problematic. And I think it is long past due that we include these idioms. I think it's going to make music study just more accessible, more rich for us all, help us become more curious. And that's one of the things that concerns me today, is that we're just not as curious as we should be, or we should be asking more questions. Why? Or what do I not know? Or what does this music in Indonesia sound like? What does this music in Brazil sound like? And embracing all of that. Guess what? There's so much music out there, we're never going to learn it all. Even in classical music, there is too much for us to learn it all. So we should just stop this mission of thinking that it's ever going to be possible. I mean, just Haydn wrote 140 symphonies. So you're not going to study them all in school because there's not enough time. But what we can do is study exemplars of all of these different types of pieces, these different idioms, so that folks have exposure to them, and that it ignites a curiosity for one to be able to explore further.
Yeah.
Brenton did take a course at Westchester University, the history of American music.
Yeah.
And they did do quite a bit
Of
on the spirituals. In fact,
That's
those Jubilee singers were part of it, because he studied those that. Yeah, so they
But like one class at Westchester, that's it. Like,
American
history. That's it. Out of all the other classes of Bach.
But it was quite a few chapters on it, which I was really glad to see.
We even studied a Beyonce song.
Oh, nice. Oh, nice.
No, we did all that American music. It was great. Great class. So you talked about, let me think here. What's the word? So let's change subjects a little bit. So for those who might not know what is a coded song, like you mentioned, Wade in the Water, could you talk about a history? What is a coded song? Like, is it,
sure.
Why is it called that? We talked about that a little bit in choir school, those types of songs, but what are they? What are they for those who might not know?
Right. A code is just something that must be broken, right? And it carries information that is not meant for public consumption. And so the spirituals carried information that was not for public consumption. The codes had to do with how to navigate the Underground Railroad. We've got mapping songs that let folks know who is safe, who's not safe, best practices in traveling the Underground Railroad, such as jumping in the water, such as follow the drinking gourd, which is about how to navigate to north to make sure that you were headed in the right direction. And then we have songs like Hold On that are talking about specific abolitionists and specific routes. And then we have songs that have lyrics that are talking about times during enslavement. You can say, hey, this is really terrible. Like, I'm not being treated well or humanely, but we began to use biblical stories to express that. And so those kind of spirituals came forth, like I've been rebuked and I've been scorned, right? And so we use biblical stories and biblical trials to help us understand what was happening in the life of those who were enslaved. That's what we are saying as coded, because those people could not talk about that in the public sphere, or certainly not while just doing work. And there are some spirituals. One of the greatest lyrics in any spiritual is "Everybody talking about heaven ain't going there," and that's a moral, right? And it is saying these folks who talk about Christianity and these folks who talk about this, who are really oppressing and holding slaves and this and that and the other, are they really on the side of the righteous? And are they really executing the word of God? And so that could not be said, and just plain, speech. And so they were coded in these spirituals. And so that's what it meant. It was a way for folks to be able to convey information and morals and lessons.
Great. So you talked about the gospel style and the spiritual style and the classical style. Like, how can I sort of know, but for those who don't know, like, how can one choir, because I'm going to hear it, how can one choir go from total praise to Christlagen Todesbanden? Like, what vocally do they do? What's the similarities and what's different?
So first of all, I believe in chiaroscuro. So chiaroscuro is a term that we use for light and dark, and building operatic voices. That means bright and dark. So that means long to ha sounds versus ha sounds. All right, and so I can sing one note like ah, or I can sing it ah, or I can even spread it more right, and they create different colors. And in these different, and in gospel, we use all of that. Spirituals, we're using more of the north-south, and we use more east-west. So northwest is the kind of darker sound, brighter sound, east-west. And so you want to be able to modify the vowels. And by modifying those vowels, we can sing a whole variety of different kinds of repertoire. And we learn how we begin to move through those vowels. Sometimes there's a dip. Sometimes, a lot of people like to say a scoop. I like to say a dip because sometimes people might overdo the scooping. But I like to call it like a dip. We try to in gospel, there are sometimes some dynamics that are happen very quickly, such as like crescendo diminuendo, so being louder than soft, like Lord, I will lift mine eyes to the hills. Right, it's going crescendoing and coming back, all right, really quickly. And that's something that we don't see as much in Western music in that way. So that, I think, is the biggest, most important, most impactful thing that a choir can do to change the style that they're singing in, is to think about rhythmic vitality and to think about vowel formants. So vowel formants are basically what we're talking about. Chiaroscuro, north-south, east-west, bright, dark, and having those different combinations and knowing how and when to use the north-south and the east-west, because it's not just all east-west, right? A lot of people think it's that too, and that it might have a sound that's overly manufactured or shouty, but it's knowing how to move through those vowels. And it's never one shape, it's always kind of this flexible thing that's happening. I like to call it a flexible format that we're moving between north, south, and east, west, or this dark and light. Chiaroscuro is the bel canto term from the opera world that we use for that.
Great. Two more questions, and these two are going to be, the first one's tougher because I know this is your wheelhouse. So we're in 2022. We're still in COVID. And, the people that I've come across, they don't want to go to a concert, or they feel, discouraged, whether it's inequality, in terms of racism or COVID, so much division in our world and society. So like, how do we teach someone to not be racist or to not be depressed in a choir school format, or in, teaching about African American history? Like, how what's your views on that if a student comes on
gosh.
and it might not be, maybe, yeah.
That's
What's
super
your views?
complex. One, I think we must always seek, as the prayer of Saint Francis of Assisi says, that we should always seek to understand rather than to be understood. And a prayer that is 1,000 years old is so relevant, right? Seek to understand rather than to be understood. And it's that simple. If we put that forward all the time and we try to put ourselves in someone else's shoes, we know that we might never have lived the experience of someone else. I will never have the experience of being an indigenous person or a woman or someone from Brazil. I will never have those experiences, but I will always strive my best using what I do know from my own life, my own lived experience, to understand struggle, to understand heartbreak, to understand joy, to understand all of these concepts that are human, a part of the human experience, and are therefore universal. Racism ends with empathy. Racism ends when we are in relationship with one another. Racism ends when we seek to understand rather than seek to be understood. So I think it's the effort of listening to others, actively listening to others, and being able to have an openness of both mind and heart to be able to hear what pains us all, what brings us all joy. And I think if we were able to do that, then the world would be a much better place. All of the isms, sexism, racism, all of those are because we aren't listening to the needs, feelings, considerations, etc. of other people. And if we can listen to them and meet them because we understand that we share this thing called humanity, then the world would be a better place. It's so simple, yet incredibly difficult to achieve in life. But I think the most simple things are the most difficult to achieve, because it means sometimes decentering ourselves in what we want and being selfless. And that's very difficult. And I think particularly in 2022, where we can get information so quickly and we can get access to, today's Amazon Prime Day, and like I can get access to a brand new 50-inch TV tomorrow morning if I want to. And so we don't have to work the same way to get things or to be in community or relationship with one another. So I think these age-old issues of hate are amplified by that. And so we have to go out of our way to disrupt those systems, to question those, to interrogate. We should be asking, well, why? Like you asked, well, why is this not in more of our curriculum? Why are we acting this way? I think stopping to ask why, not out of condemnation, but seeking to understand is the key.
Yeah, I had a friend that said that anything that's divisive, it's always selfish. It always starts with the core of what I think it should be, and rather hearing what other people think and really caring for others. I love the prayers, that one prayer. So yeah, really, I totally agree. So that might encourage like residents who might be feeling down or might not understand, that culture. The last question,
they could do that right at Friends Home.
Yeah,
they're getting along with each other.
And Friends Home is very, not as much the residents, but the staff is very diverse. I mean, it's very diverse. And I think that's something that, Friends Home is another organization that really strives for that. Last question. So you are the director of operations at choir school. So what is your goal in the next few years or this coming year of choir school? What are you hoping to do? And what are you hoping for your students, your employees, the audiences, your donors to take away from a choir school concert? Or what, when they come home, what do you want them to say? That's what choir school is, and that's what makes it unique, and that is, pivotal in the Delaware community. What is your goals, and what do you hope to inspire for everybody?
I hope that people take away that we all have a voice, that we can all make change in this world. And choir is the best communal way and community-centric way to cultivate our voices. And they can all be different, yet together they are great. And I think that is the message that I seek to share. As far as the choir school, I hope that we can continue to expand to make this opportunity available. There are more folks than we currently have the capacity to be able to serve. I want to be able to make this available to any kid in our area who would like to sing. That's not something that we can do today because there are space concerns and financial sort of realities. But my goal in the years is to significantly expand that and to really realize our dream of being that the choir school is a community center that just happens to sing. And I that's kind of what the long-term vision is of the choir school. It's a place where you come in for music and choir, and you leave with all of these wonderful skills and tutoring and homework help and all of these things. It's kind of like Target. You go in for toilet paper and you come out with the cart full of all these other things. Like, that's what the choir school should be. It should be, you come in for this musical experience, but you leave so much richer. And let me tell you this, a lot of people always kind of contextualize like, man, like your kids, your students are getting a lot. But I think we, the adults, we have the most to gain. Because we are cultivating a generation that is going to be able to take care of us when we are older, to right the wrongs that we have perpetrated, and to be able to be stewards of this earth and of our communities. And so we are the ones that gain. We are the ones that are granted grace. We are the ones that are granted forgiveness. And I think that is really important. I feel like I get so much out of it. And a lot of people are like, oh, the kids get so much out of it. We all get out of it. Our community as a whole gets a lot out of it.
Yeah, I totally agree. That's very true. And once again, friends, Arreon Harley Emerson is a part of this choir school of Delaware. So if you're online and you want to know what is this choir school is about, you can go to the Choir School of Delaware's website. I don't have it on the top of my head, but just type Choir School of Delaware and it'll come up, and it'll tell a little bit about that. And Arreon's website, equalitysings.com, and you can find out more information about him. But really, Arreon, we could talk for hours. I don't want to hold you up, but Aaron, thank you so much. It really,
a real pleasure.
It's inspired me to be better, to be everybody to be better, that we're all in this together. We are all equal, and we can all bring something musical and learn from different cultures and learn different ideas. And anybody can do this music, anybody. And choir singing just brings a unique sound of unity. And it's just like I attest, when you sing with choir school and Arreon's conducting, there is a unity there. There's a family in choir school. So really, if you have a grandson that loves singing and wants to sing like Arreon and I did, please go to choir school, check them out if you're near Wilmington, and I'm sure you will love the experience. Well, Arreon, thank you so much. We will have you back again with live residents next time. And I'm going to end the live stream, and then we can take a picture and all that stuff afterwards. But thank you so much, everybody. I'm going to stop the recording. I hope that you enjoyed this lecture. I hope you took at the heart what Arreon said. And thank you so much. Until we see you next time. Thank you.